Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Pardon the interruption. We're going to get started. You guys are so much better behaved than so many other audiences in this room. My name is Dan Moulthrop. I'm the chief executive here at the City Club. We are proud partners of NOACA and really grateful to have NOACA's partnership on so many things that happen here at the City Club, but also just so grateful to be a part of other conversations about the importance of planning and infrastructure throughout our community. This moment in time, this sort of 50th anniversary of NOACA's founding is deeply important. It's really remarkable to think how much has changed over the years, over these last 5 decades. 1968 was a moment of incredible turmoil in our community and our nation. And the strides that we have made today at this point, to this point, are really, really incredible to imagine and consider. And that's sort of what we're here to honor and celebrate and discuss. I am not going to take any more of your time because I know there's far more interesting and more important people who are going to follow momentarily. And to kick things off, it's our very own county executive, the Honorable Armand Budish. Please give him a round of applause.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you all here. It's my real pleasure. I am the Cuyahoga County Executive and the 2018 President of the Board of Directors for the Northeast Ohio Area Coordinating Agency, or NOACA. I'm also, I think I was looking at what's at our desk, or what's at our tables here, and I think I'm one of the few people, in the minority at least, that remembers what this is and what these are. All right, so it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you today to this 50th anniversary celebration of NOACA serving as our regional planning agency. There are 5 counties included in the NOACA scope: Cuyahoga, Geauga, Lake, Lorraine, and Medina. I can tell you from my perch as county executive that it's not easy coordinating regional plans for the 59 cities in Cuyahoga County. NOACA handles 5 counties. That is a huge challenge. But NOACA does a great job working together despite sometimes very differing views. NOACA is able to get a whole lot done, and that's what makes this organization so successful. And in fact, the collaboration that we have in this entire region is what makes our region so successful. NOACA's primary focus is transportation. NOACA is charged by the federal government with determining which transportation projects should get federal money, and that is important. But transportation, when you think about transportation, by the way, it's not just roads and highways. It includes all types. It's bicycles, it's rail, it's pedestrian, even buggies are included in transportation. NOACA handles more than just transportation, too. It also deals with water quality and air quality. These issues, transportation, water, and air quality, can't be addressed in silos because they impact almost everything we do in government and in our communities. And these issues have to be part of everything we do in our planning. So, for example, jobs have been a key focus for our city and our county governments, attracting and growing businesses, and training people to fill the thousands of job openings that currently exist. But if people can't get to those jobs, if they don't have a car and the job's on the other side of town, there's a problem. Connecting transportation with jobs across silos so people can get to work is an issue for people seeking work, and it's also an issue for our businesses that need employees to be able to get there. Our cities and counties also focus on making our communities more livable. So, for example, young people want easy access to work, to restaurants, to entertainment. That ties directly to transportation. And when we talk about community livability, our water, our rivers, and our lakes are key assets. NOACA's focus on water quality ties directly into the livability of our communities. Today's event is called 50 Years of NOACA, Reflecting on the Past and Forging the Future. For NOACA, planning means understanding the past and using that understanding to take care of the needs of today and tomorrow. That's why, for example, NOACA's leading the efforts to explore the Hyperloop, looking into our future. The Hyperloop, a train that can take us to or from Chicago in less than an hour. That could be the future. So today we'll reflect on our past and consider our future. The conversations that will take place about our past should help inform our future. This should be an exciting day. Before we get into the conversation, I'd like to acknowledge my fellow NOACA board members in the audience today because they make this agency work. And there are many, many board members here and alternates for some of them as well. So too many to call by name. So I'm just going to ask all the board members to stand, if you will, and so we can say thank you for your work and dedication. As a good politician, I'm going to make an exception and only recognize one county council member, my friend and colleague Dale Miller, who's here somewhere today. Also, I want to recognize the elected officials of the cities that make up this region. And again, I'm not going to call you by name, but your support for NOACA is critical to everything that we do. So please stand so we can acknowledge your help as well. Any elected officials? And finally, NOACA is very good at what it does because of the dedication and hard work of its board and its staff members. 50 years of our history provides that shows that those statements are true. We're very fortunate to have, in particular, an executive director who is a great, great leader, Grace Gallucci. I'm not going to ask Grace to stand yet because she's going to be up here in a minute. But I want to thank you, Grace, for all your great work. And she didn't even write that part of this talk. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to wish you an informative and entertaining afternoon. I thank you for celebrating with us, and now I'm pleased to turn the mic over to Grace. Thank you. Wait, yeah, I don't want to forget my pencils.
Well, no, that's the GIS system of the past. So let me start, good afternoon, let me start by expressing my thanks and appreciation to County Executive Armin Budish, who is our board president, for his leadership and support of the organization. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the entire NOACA board for its unfailing commitment and its contributions. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the executive committee members, Commissioners Dan Troy from Lake County, Ted Kalo from Lorain, Adam Frederick from Medina, and Tim Lennon from Geauga County, as well as Chief Valarie McCall and Mayor Frank Jackson from the city of Cleveland. I'd also like to recognize the NOACA staff for all of their hard work, as without them, NOACA's work does not get done. Let's give them a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, during its 50 years, NOACA has seen the development of our network of highways, the evolution of our transit systems, and the formation of our region. The region has changed over the years, and NOACA has changed along with it to ensure safe, efficient, and multimodal transportation. Who would be better able to speak about the way things were and how they have changed over time than some of the people who lived through those times and whose leadership helped us to get to where we are today, and those who are still leading us into the future. That's why we've planned this day as we have, to reflect on our past, our history, and to consider our future. And that's why we've invited the esteemed panel of professional and transportation luminaries that are here today with us. No one can speak to the work, the issues, and the successes like these folks that I will introduce. So I am excited to moderate this conversation, which we will begin shortly. On a personal note, it's been an honor and a privilege to be at the helm of NOACA, serving all of you in Greater Cleveland. I'm especially honored to be at the helm of this agency at such a historic moment in its existence. I've been with NOACA a bit over 5 years, which is just a fraction, actually 1/10 to be exact, of the time that NOACA has been in existence. I'm only the 5th executive director over those 50 years, but I can't think of anywhere else I would rather be. In those 5 years, NOACA has continued in the tradition of forging ahead, breaking new ground, so to speak, and that was a pun that was intended, getting things done to build a better transportation system while at the same time ensuring that the air we breathe and the water we drink gets cleaner. Over the last 50 years, NOACA has planned for and facilitated the implementation of a myriad of regionally significant projects. Everything from the Interbelt to the Health Line to the towpath, all the way to minor projects like the ones we use to develop the TLCI program. But it's never been about the projects themselves. It's been about improving access and mobility so people can get to work, to school, to the doctor, to visit with family and friends. It's been about environmental sustainability. It's been about supporting our economy. And most importantly, it's been about enhancing the quality of life for our citizens. Before we move to the panels, I want to thank the sponsors of this event for their support of NOACA. It's thanks to them that we're able to bring you quality events like this one. Our sponsors for today's program are WSP, the Greater Cleveland Metro Parks, the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, AECOM, Michael Baker International, Albert Gherkin Incorporated, the Northeast Ohio First Suburbs Consortium, the Senior Transportation Connection, and CT Consultants. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our sponsors. And by the way, most of today's sponsors have already committed to support NOACA's annual meeting on September 14th. So please mark that date on your calendar. And thank you again to our sponsors. But first, as in any good anniversary celebration, we have a cake to celebrate NOACA's 50th anniversary. So to be efficient, we've already cut the cake and served it to you, but we have a ceremonial one to cut in front of you. Executive Budish, please join me in making the first slice of ceremonial cake. This will actually be served to our staff back at the office later today. Thank you. I think staff told me this was as close as they could get to something that resembled a shovel. So next, leading right into the panel discussion, I am very excited to introduce some of Greater Cleveland's transportation planning legends. The legends of transportation, it was the theme as we're moving forward. So in thinking about this event, we wanted to create an interesting discussion that encapsulated the history of NOACA and the role it played in our region. But telling a 50-year story in an afternoon lunch session is at best a difficult challenge. We figured the best way to meet that challenge is to bring those who were around as the history was being made itself. So we have 2 panels today with 4 panelists on each, all of whom have shared their professional careers doing the work of NOACA. In fact, I believe all of them have been former NOACA board members, other than Carla, but I believe as ODOT had a seat on the board, so I consider you having been kind of a board member. So the first panel could be described as a group of practitioner leaders representing the community. Oftentimes what we refer to or call our project sponsors, those who work with and through NOACA to form the impactful projects that have moved our region forward over the years. The second panel includes practitioner leaders who represent NOACA as former or current members of the NOACA board. I will give a short biographical introduction of each panelist as they make their way up to the stage, and then I will have, for the first panel, Ron Tober set the table for our first discussion. So the first panel, Ron Tober, Carla Sefirot, Jerry Ruby, and Norm Krumholtz, please come to the stage. And first, a quick bio on Ron Tober. Ron Tober, actually as a former boss of mine, is a local boy who made good. He graduated from Lakewood High School, went on to the Ivy League, receiving a degree in engineering from Cornell University, then came back to earn a master's degree from Case Western Reserve University. Ron's career in transportation spans 47 years. His first job in public transportation was working on the before and after study of the rapid transit extension to Hopkins Airport for the Cleveland Transit System, which, by the way, if most of you may or may not know, that was the first in the country where you had a train system that went from downtown to an airport. Ron served as the general manager and secretary-treasurer of GCRTA from 1988 to 1999. In addition to Cleveland, Ron held executive positions at transit systems in Seattle, Charlotte, Miami, and Boston. Ron served as the chair of the American Public Transit Association, or APTA, and was inducted into APTA's Hall of Fame. Ron is recognized around the world as a transit expert. Ron is currently semi-retired, but he is still a consultant with WSP. Next, Carla Sefirot had a 25-year career in transportation, serving in senior positions at the Ohio Department of Transportation. As ODOT's Deputy Director of Local Programs, she managed the state's major transportation programs, including staffing the state's Transportation Review Advisory Committee, TRAC, which is responsible for major new transportation projects around the state. This means Carla managed the programs that help shape and maintain the state's transportation network. Her leadership at ODOT resulted in the creation of the State Infrastructure Bank, which currently we have about $80 million that we have utilized and is currently outstanding to support projects in Northeast Ohio. So thank you, Carla. She has been recognized for her achievements in the transportation industry by US DOT, AASHTO, and OPTA. A native of Greater Cleveland, she was always passionate about working with Northeast Ohio and has been a valuable asset for NOACA. Next, Jerry Ruby is in his 8th term as the mayor of the city of Brecksville. Similar to the tagline of our event today, Mayor Ruby's slogan is building on our future with respect to our past. He was first elected in 1988, and his current 30 years of service makes him one of the longest-serving mayors ever in Northeast Ohio. He was on the NOACA board for 11 years, including board president in 1999. Incidentally, his brother Jack Ruby was on the founding NOACA board. Mayor Ruby has been a strong advocate of regional development and transportation planning. It is hard to talk about transportation in Northeast Ohio without mentioning Jerry Ruby. He is currently the chair of the Ohio Turnpike Commission. He has served on the TRAC. He has been a board member of the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority and was instrumental in the establishment of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which does include a passenger railroad. And last but not least, we have Norm Krumholz. Professor Krumholtz almost needs no introduction in Northeast Ohio. He is a legendary figure in Cleveland and around the world. In fact, it is likely that many people in this room were at one time a student of his, as he taught at Cleveland State University's College of Urban Affairs since 1985. And those students include me. Although he has held planning positions in other major cities, such as Pittsburgh, he is most known for serving as Director of Planning for the City of Cleveland from 1969 through 1979, serving multiple terms and for multiple mayors. Mayor Carl Stokes, who originally hired him, then Mayor Ralph Perk, and Mayor Dennis Kucinich. Norm's time at the City of Cleveland coincided with the formation of NOACA. In fact, Professor Krumholtz was one of the earliest members of the NOACA Board of Directors representing the City of Cleveland on behalf of Mayor Stokes. Professor Krumholtz is also best known for the implementation of equity planning. In fact, his book, Making Equity Planning Work, which was first published in 1990 by Temple University Press, is still a bestseller. And as I heard over the weekend at the APA conference, he still gets requests for autographs. And they were very disappointed, by the way, that you were not there to give autographs. Professor Krumholtz was president of the American Planning Association and is a recipient of the famed internationally recognized Rome Prize. So we have a terrific panel here, and I'll ask Ron Tober to start out with some comments, remarks, to give us sort of a broad history of where we are, where we've been, and to kind of get the panel going.
Thank you, Grace, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm particularly pleased that we're letting public transportation talk first. Okay.
That's what happens when you hire a transportation professional to be the head of NOACA.
No offense, Howard, right? For sure. Anyways, I'm very pleased to be here. I'll just make a couple of comments. There are a lot of thoughts that I'd like to share with you as we get into the panel's discussion on some things, systemic challenges for public transportation, some issues that I think would be helpful for the community to address and tag into some of NOACA's work. As Grace said, my first job in public transportation straight out of college in 1969 was to work on the before and after study. I had grew up on the west side of Cleveland on 116th Street, and then we moved out to Lakewood, and we lived there through most of my high school days, as a matter of fact. But we grew up, and we used to ride the Rapid downtown. In fact, my parents used to take me on the old blue Rapid cars that some of you may remember. Down at Christmas time, we went down to Higbee's and went to look at the Christmas displays, and we'd go up to the Silver Grill and have Christmas lunch. That was a thrill for me. Now, a lot of you in the audience don't know what I'm talking about. I'm sorry, but I do see a few heads that have more hair than I do, but are gray, and they're shaking their heads, remembering those days. Public transportation has been my life's work. I was particularly pleased to get called by George Voinovich to come back here to Cleveland. I was out in Seattle at the time to run the RTA. Know a little bit about history of the agency, and I'm going to say a few things which may tweak a few folks in the room at some point in time during the course of discussion. But I want to go back to the 1950s, actually 14 years before NOACA was created, and some of perhaps the forerunner kinds of things that went on. Some of you may not know that in 1954, the voters of Cuyahoga County approved a bond issue to build a downtown subway. It was a very small subway, but there was a bond issue that actually was going to cost $30 million back in 1954, which was probably a tremendous amount of money, I'm sure, back in those days. Well, that never happened because the county engineer at that point in time, a gentleman by the name of Albert Porter, decided that Cleveland should be investing in highways instead. And in 1956, the Interstate Highway Act was passed by Congress and became such. The Inner Belt followed, Dead Man Curve along with it, the Eastern Shoreway, Interstate 77, Interstate 71, and a lot of money was spent on investing in the roadway infrastructure. But that thing that was approved by the voters was actually submarine, basically. The county engineer got the county commissioners to forget about doing what the voters had approved and not build that subway. It's interesting to note that at the same time, another Great Lakes city on a different lake, and that is Toronto, was also talking about building a downtown subway, the Yonge Street subway. Well, they went ahead and built their subway. At that time, Toronto and Cleveland were just about the same size, just under 1 million in population. Now, there's a nice comparison there. I'm not suggesting to you that the reason why Toronto is a 4 million largest, whatever it is, largest city in Canada was because they built a subway and we didn't here in Cleveland. But it is an interesting contrast because the public policy direction was to invest in roadways, and that has continued on. When I worked on the before and after study, I worked with a guy who worked for NOACA, because NOACA was brand new at that point in time. Isaac Shafran was the sort of the modeling guy, and we worked very closely with him as we were putting together the data to do a report on that, which was the last major investment in public transportation infrastructure, that extension out to the airport. Before, we built the waterfront line, which is not one of my favorite or one of my best projects, Norm, okay? Unfortunately hasn't reached its potential. But the health line, we conceived of the health line, and Joe and his folks have done a terrific job. That is the more recent investments that we've made in public transportation. We need to invest more in public transit. I've had the honor of serving in the transit agency in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a very fast-growing city. We built 2 light rail lines. And one of the thoughts I'll share with you is that Charlotte and a lot of other cities around the country are clamoring to build the kinds of public transportation infrastructure that Cleveland has, in the red line and in the 2 light rail lines, the shaker lines, the blue and the green lines. They can't wait to build those things. Charlotte's that way, and of course Nashville is trying to get that. Raleigh-Durham area in North Carolina is trying to get that. They recognize the value of those things. Cleveland and the greater Cleveland area and the surrounding counties need to recognize the value that exists in the RTA and what it can do for the community. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of my thoughts on that in terms of transit-oriented development and value capture and a few other things when we get into the panel discussion. So I'll get off my soapbox now and turn things back to Grace for us to talk.
Thank you very much. As Ron Tober and I were speaking in preparation for today, I mentioned separately from him the issue of how so many other cities around the country are trying so hard to get federal funding and even taxing themselves to build what we already have here. Think Salt Lake City, think Denver, think Atlanta, who's now building an extension after its first round of subway in the 70s. And Washington, D.C., we really need to think about how lucky we are to have what we have and to think of it as a regional asset and build around that. And to that, I will point my first question to Carla Sefirot. Carla, ODOT, which, by the way, many of you may or may not know, was formerly known as the Ohio Department of Highways. Not the Ohio Department of Transportation, but the Ohio Department of Highways, is well known for building roads. But one of your biggest projects when you were with ODOT was the Euclid Corridor Improvement Project, a transit project now known as the Healthline BRT. How did it come to be that ODOT, the Ohio Department of Highways, was engaged in that innovation?
Well, the stars finally aligned. I joined the department in the early 80s and actually was recruited because they were trying to make the department a Department of Transportation rather than a Department of Highways. The name had changed, but nothing had really changed in the agency. So I think there's really 3 critical areas that allowed the health line to go forward. And one was, first, the change in federal laws. Second, I think, was the creation of the track, because we now had a mechanism to evaluate projects. And then third was that the role that NOACA played in getting people to understand that this was a priority for the region. And I want to go back first to the changes at the federal level, because I think had that not happened, I don't think we would have seen the amount of funding for transit because as a state, we have just chosen not to support transit as an option for transportation. But you had ICE-T, T21, Safety Lou, all of those projects, and all of a sudden at the federal level, they were saying, we want you to focus on the movement of goods and people, not on the movement of another highway. It was goods and people, and then each community should figure out how best to do that. And so you also then had some set-asides. You had the CMAQ program, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Funds. You had transportation enhancements. Excuse me. And so there was some minimum set-asides that had to be, the money had to be spent on that. So I think that played like a really critical role. And you also had the ability to flex funds, where it used to be they were highway funds, they were now called surface transportation funds. And so the state had the ability to flex the funds to transit if they chose to do so. Then you had the creation of the track, and Mayor Ruby was one of our founding council representatives. And I think the track was one of the best things that ODOT ever did. It created a project selection process that looked at how do you fund projects, how do you select projects, and it could be rail, they could be transit, they could be highways. And they were all kind of put on an equal footing as to what was the criteria to go forward with these projects. They also encouraged each of the regions of Ohio to prioritize their projects and to advocate for them. And we would have hearings across the state. We would take the track members up the day before, and we would give them a tour of these potential projects that people were asking for. So it wasn't something on paper. They got to go in Cleveland, they got to go down Euclid Corridor, see what we wanted to connect with the helpline. And I mean, it made the projects, I think, much more real to people, and they could see the potential for it. And I really think that was important. And then the track also had a funding source. They were more concerned about selecting the projects and then letting ODOT figure out how to pay for it. But they put all of the projects kind of on equal footing, and I think that was really helpful, rather than these silos of these are our highway projects, these are our transit projects, these are our rail projects, because rail and transit literally got no money. And then the third thing was NOACA. You can have this great process, but if you don't have good projects developed and you don't have the community coming together to say this is a priority for our region, then nothing's going to happen. And so I think NOACA did a really good job of getting all the projects out there, prioritizing them, and then educating the community on how to be an advocate for them. And so when we had our hearings, you had a unified front. And let me tell you, it's a lot easier to say no to GCRTA. It is very hard to say no to the greater Cleveland community. And I think that's what made the project really successful.
Great, thank you. You mentioned Mayor Ruby in his role as a member of the track committee. Following up on that, being on the track committee, being a part of the Ohio Turnpike Commission and the board of the GCRTA, and a board member and former president of NOACA, what makes the NOACA board different or the same, or how do they interact with those other kinds of transportation boards?
First of all, I think each board has you play a different role, and let me explain. Instead of answering that right away, let me get to that at the end. We formed a urban paving committee. At one point, ODOT was fixing the state highways and maintaining the state highways in our communities. Eventually, with the number of state highways and the improvements that were being made, they then decided that the cost of those improvements should fall back on the local communities, on the municipal governments, either by going and competing for federal funds or by providing your own funding. So I was placed on that board, and that role, as far as I was concerned, was to be a referee between ODOT, who said no, and all of our communities who said yes. And literally, they sent me throughout the state, and I met with various mayors. Some mayors ran me out on a rail. Some mayors were interested in what we had to say. But to make a long story short, that referee role ended up in forming an urban paving policy, which we now have today, which most of the mayors accept and understand. The older mayors didn't accept and understand. So it was a referee type job. Then I was on the railroad crossing, same thing. The track, it gave us, and it gave all of the citizens in all the regions an opportunity to give their input about a project and how it would impact their community and the value of it to their community. And on the other hand, ODOT would encourage the track members to make sure that each and every one of these communities would pay their fair share. So if they wanted a certain project, were they willing to contribute towards it? And they were putting in interchanges anywhere. That stopped. You had to pay a percentage of the interchanges. They were putting in highways any and everywhere. The competition became, and then the track board. And I remember George Voinovich was the governor who started track. And I remember him saying, back in the old days, Jim Rhodes would go into a tent during the county fair, and he'd stand up against a heifer and put his hand on the heifer and talk to the mayor and say, okay, mayor, well, we'll get you this done. And then the mayor would go to ODOT and say, well, I'm supposed to get my project done. They say, well, we don't know anything about it. And go see the governor. I mean, it was that kind of, how did these projects get done? And it was just local politics, plain simple. The track took that away. The track has gone through an evolution, but being on the track board, you really had to analyze and take a look at what was good for that region. Did it really make sense? Were they willing to contribute towards it, and so forth? And it was like a judge. What was the best plan that you had? You only had so many millions of dollars to spend. Then the NOACA board. NOACA was, at the time that I was on the board, they were more difficult times than they are today. Even though there's a lot of money there, the politics was very difficult back then. And there was a lot of this, we're all going to work together. The hell we are when it comes to, you want that done here in your county? Well, we better get this done in this county. And because if you don't, and it was that kind of thing. But what really happened out of it was, the board, I think, evolved and gave the staff more and more responsibilities. The staff became more and more important. We had outstanding leadership with Howard Maier. He had one of the finest staffs that I've ever had a chance to work with. And those folks went out and they put the projects together, working with the local governments, and really made the board's job sort of easy. But the NOACA board, again, is supposed to be a planning agency. Planning should be going on. I think it does, more so today than it did in the past. But that agency was, in my opinion back then, was instrumental in doing a lot of things that some people didn't like. The mayors didn't want the Euclid Avenue corridor. I remember going to a meeting and I thought, wait a minute, I'm here to propose that they support this Euclid Avenue corridor, and they're here to kill it. And, the NOACA board is the reason why that got built. And this guy here, that's the reason it got built. Plain and simple. Carla and ODOT. It got built because there were a lot of people who were dedicated and willing to stand and take a ground at that point, stand their ground. Now, the turnpike, what's the difference there? That's a business, folks. That is a business. That is a 241-mile of road business. We generate about, our operating budget, $300 million a year. We generate just under $800,000 a day we take in revenues. This governor had a great vision. And his vision was to sell it, get rid of it, and take the money and do something with it, or lease it and take the money and do something with it. Well, that got changed, and he changed his mind. And the idea was to leverage it and use the ability to borrow money through the turnpike's revenue stream coming in and spread that out when there was no money available to do a lot of the projects. So a lot of the new projects that are going on now came as a result of the turnpike. Who decided if those projects would be done or not? The Turnpike Commission. It was created that way by the state legislature when they created the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission. So the commission decided based upon just like track. They came in before us. ODOT worked on each one of them. ODOT brought in their proposals, their recommendations, and the Turnpike Commission decided which of those projects would be done, let alone operating and running the Turnpike. So the Turnpike is more of a board for business, deciding what's a good investment, what's a good maintenance plan, what do we do with our dollars, how do we promote Easy Pass, how do we this, how do we that. That's that kind of a job. So they're really different. But the one that engaged in a lot of politics, the one that engaged with a lot of staff was really the NOACA board, and of course track. But track was a little less politics, a little more politics with NOACA. So I would say out of all the boards, they all function well. They've all done a great job, and I was just humbled and pleased to have served them all.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ruby. Professor Krumholtz, your role at the City of Cleveland Planning Commission as its director in the late 1960s and early 1970s gave you essentially a seat on the NOACA board when it was just forming. And having been your student and having read your book, and I know that was not necessarily, in your view, the way it should have been in terms of the organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about your impressions of NOACA at that time?
Be happy to. In December 1969, if some of you can remember that far back, I had been in the city of Cleveland for about a month. And on a December morning, I was asked by Mayor Carl Stokes to represent him on the NOACA board. And my instructions were, vote for further study. and apparently this pattern had been going on for some time. And I went out to the NOACA board and realized that on a board of 48 or 49 white men, I was the only representative of an African-American mayor. The conversation at the board went on in a reasonable way, and then someone moved that we evaluate the Clark Freeway, or I-290, a highway that was supposed to go through the east side of Cleveland, through Shaker Heights at that time, to intersect with I-271. And the motion was for further study. And I did what my mayor had advised me to do, voted for further study. Well, we were creamed. The board voted like 40 to 5 or 6 in favor of rejecting further study. We had, at that time, on a 49-member board, 3 representatives from the city of Cleveland. So that was a little disconcerting, but what happened next was even more disconcerting when the county engineer, the Cuyahoga County engineer, stood and introduced his own resolution, which was to certify I-290, or the Clark Freeway, as moving through this corridor, which, among other things, would have utterly destroyed the city of Shaker Heights, let alone much of the east side of the city of Cleveland. That motion carried by the same amount as the previous motion had failed. So I returned to City Hall and talked to Mayor Stokes, and he asked me why the NOACA board had taken such a upsetting kind of decision. After all, the NOACA board at that point had not been noteworthy for its controversial activities. It had been going along pretty much just like city council, all limited liability kinds of activities. And I said, well, it was impossible to say. I guess there were groups of people on the NOACA board who simply wanted to move forward on this highway construction. There were other groups that wanted to perhaps curry favor with the Cuyahoga County engineer, who was a very powerful figure in the state politics. And I thought, based on my observation, that there probably were people on the NOACA board who resented Carl Stokes, who, after all, if you remember, was a national figure, even an international figure, while they were sort of county commissioners, and also that Carl Stokes was an African American, which sort of suggested that racial discrimination might have played a role in that process. In any event, the city decided, as a result of these moves, to sue NOACA in federal court based on a one-man, one-vote basis, which is to say we demanded more representation on the board. But the backstory, of course, was we really weren't interested in anything more than the rescinding of that resolution. We wanted the Clark Freeway I-290 resolution rescinded, and we were determined to fight it all the way. The next step the city took was to sue NOACA in federal court and to create a havoc with the federal government by, while saying in the agency, simply not paying our dues. As a result of these activities, NOACA was decertified. So I think NOACA may have been the first Council of Governments in the United States to be decertified. And so far as I know, it might have been the only Council of Government to be decertified. This activity went on during the rest of Carl Stokes' term. And as you know, Carl Stokes decided in 1971 to retire from the mayor's office and go to New York City to serve in another position. And Mayor Perk was elected. Mayor Perk, white ethnic Republican, immediately struck a rapport with the NOACA board, who agreed to raise the city's representation and rescinded the I-290 decision, thus bringing that particular episode to a close. What kind of conclusion you can draw from this, I think, is pretty much up to the individual. But it does seem as if race played a role in that decision and that whole period of turmoil. And if I may say so, although NOACA has generated an enormous amount of good activity and cooperation in the region, that issue, the issue of race, remains a central disorganizing aspect of planning in the greater Cleveland metropolitan area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Almost exactly how I remember it in school. Very good. Consistent story. Back to Ron Tober. GCRTA and NOACA were created to administer regional transportation systems, one purely transit and one multimodal. How do you think they've done in accomplishing that agenda, and do you think the current models still adequately serve the region today?
Well, Grace, I have to disagree with you on one thing. The RTA was not created to be a regional transit system, even though it has regional in its name. It was created to create a Cuyahoga County transit system, which it did do by the absorption of some of the suburban bus operations and the creation of one integrated network that served Cuyahoga County.
But I think that was about as regional as they could get in those days.
Right. In those days, that was as regional as perhaps we could get. So we have transit systems now in Lake County and in Lorain County and I believe in Geauga County. So you've got things going on in some of the surrounding counties that are also part of NOACA. So one of the things that I hope we're able to do, or that NOACA is able to do, is to begin to look at a regional plan effort for public transportation in this area and how you might go about sort of integrating the transit systems and looking at putting them together in some fashion. Look at that from a governance standpoint and also from a funding standpoint. looking at NOACA, I think generally, from my standpoint, even as a transit guy who hasn't seen, in my judgment, enough money go to public transportation, I think NOACA's done a good job. NOACA was the first planning agency that I know of, long before it was required by the federal government, to put a transit agency person on their board. And I had the distinction of being that, and I thank Howard, for that happening, because it was trend setting, or ahead of the pack, so to speak, or ahead of the curve, because it did get required by the federal government later. And it was always a pleasure for me to participate in NOACA efforts, while during the time that remaining time that I had on the RTA board. I think one of the things that NOACA and the RTA need to do in terms of the future is this issue of connecting people and jobs, getting jobs closer to where people live, and investing in public transportation services to get people out to jobs in the suburban areas, particularly those people who are transit dependent. Both the RTA and NOACA need to focus some attention on that. It is a land use issue as much as it is a transportation issue, and I know you all have done some work in the transit-oriented development area, because I think, as I said earlier, you've got these tremendous assets, looking at focusing development around some of those assets to create opportunity for more jobs to be created. Some of what's going on in the Healthline corridor could be extrapolated on other parts of the Red Line, and even on parts of the Blue and the Green Line, and I understand there's some great development going on out there at the end of the Van Aken line as well. That those things are important, to take advantage of the asset that you have. So I think there's good success generally in the past, but I think the future, you need to be doing more together to try to really create a regional transportation network that takes advantage of the assets and starts to concentrate development around public transportation facilities.
Great. Keeping on that theme of, what could we or should we do to plot the NOACA future? Do any of the other panelists have any ideas as to, based on NOACA's current or past priorities and how it's achieved its accomplishments over the last 50 years, what do you think we should look like in the next 50 years? What should we be doing?
Well,
Norm?
if I may offer a couple of suggestions, which would be kind of difficult, but I think one of the things that our region suffers from is a disparity between the economic condition of most of the people in the central city and most of the people in the region. And so we find all these characteristics of poverty, for example, concentrated poverty in the central city and increasingly in the first-ring suburbs. And the rest of the region seems to be doing very, very well in comparison. In order to generate a higher economic base for the entire region, I think those disparities should be equalized to the extent that they can. And in order to do that, I think NOACA and other regional agencies in the country have to face that necessity. That is to say, to try to level off regional economic disparities and also some of the manifestations of regional economic disparities. And they have to do with failing school systems, for example, and the concentration of low-income housing in certain communities that distort patterns which should be generally upward into patterns that are flat or generally downward. Now, I understand dealing with the kinds of issues that I'm talking about transcend transportation. They involve housing in a very fundamental way and land use. And those are areas which are the basis for potential controversy, but also the basis for regional betterment of the sort that I think we need.
So, Professor Krumholtz, I am happy to report that the NOACA board has been making progress in that area. They have established some groundbreaking policies that we refer to as policies for disadvantaged and environmental justice communities that takes away some of the barriers that would prevent or have prevented communities from participating in receiving transportation funding and getting transportation access. So we've been moving in that direction. I'm sure that we'll continue to do that and take the words that you say to heart. Anything else that board members, yes, board members except for Carla, and would like to add about what you'd like to see us doing in the next 50 years?
Well, one of the things that is not the, I guess, the role of the board, but it's something that's very, very important. We are seeing a great decline in our ability to get funding for local projects, county projects, RTA. It's getting more and more difficult. There are opportunities to raise dollars. Politicians in Washington don't want to make those decisions. In the state level, they don't want to make the decisions. But yet at the same time, there has been a sort of a take back from the local communities, making it more and more difficult for us to maintain our roads, maintain our highways. So the lobbying effort on the part of NOACA with the federal government, to me is, and I know you can't do that, that's not one of the things that you're allowed to do, but through the board members speaking to their state legislators, speaking to the federal legislators, talking about this need. When Jane, I remember Jane Campbell had left as mayor, or maybe she was the mayor at the time, when we got the 2 cents, 2 cents, 2 cents, and the gasoline tax. Do you all remember that? Mm-hmm. What a boom in projects. Just that little bit of money brought. And when gasoline goes from $2.37 to $2.73, who's going to miss 2 or 3 cents? And is the population really going to fight that? So I just, that's something that I think you have to, the board has to recognize, all of us have to recognize, you could be doing so much more if there was money. And it's just not there. That's one thing. And the second thing that I always have gone back to in all of the ones that I've served, what do we do in Cleveland to make it better for Summit County? What do we do in Lorraine that we make it better for Ashtabula? I mean, what are we as a region really looking at how we benefit each other? Back in the days of old, it was, don't allow 71 to be widened because all you're doing is adding to the urban sprawl. Was that true? Did that really happen? I mean, it was one of the things and one of the criteria that took place for the politics that was going on at the time to decide what projects were being done.
Yes, it did happen.
It did. So, I mean, you saw it coming. You knew it was gonna be there. And you knew it was going to spread out into the suburbs. The First Ring Consortium recognized that early on and been working since that time. So I guess those are just a few thoughts that I have that I'd like to throw in. But as a board, I just encourage the members of the board to reach out to their local politicians, to their state legislators and the federal government, and try to support more funding and find creative ways, like we did with the Turnpike, to try to fund some of these projects. Because it's just something that's absolutely missing right now. Just don't have the money.
Boss?
Carla, right? I got some money down in North Carolina, but you can't have it.
Yeah.
So let me tell you about a comparison of 2 states, North Carolina and the state of Ohio. Both of whom would talk about being first in flight and all this kind of stuff that goes on back and forth between the 2 states. State of North Carolina, a state of 10.1 million, about 1.5 million behind Ohio and rapidly catching up, and probably going to pass Ohio in population sometime, not at the next census, but sometime in the 2020s. We have a Republican supermajority in both the House and the Senate of the state of North Carolina. We had a Republican governor up until recently. We now have a Democratic governor, and that's for other reasons. The state of North Carolina spends almost $100 million a year in subsidizing the operating expenses for public transportation systems. $100 million a year. They also contributed capital funding. In our case in Charlotte, we built 2 light rail lines. The state of North Carolina put $480 million into helping to fund the non-federal share of those 2 projects. Those projects have now created something on the order of $3.5 billion worth of money.
This is with a overwhelmingly large majority of Republicans.
That's the point.
Tea
okay?
Party kind of Republicans
And yes,
in the state.
there are a
House.
few of those in North Carolina, okay?
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of us transplants down there. North Carolina is
Yeah,
sort of
well,
a purple state.
But that's pretty
But
incredible.
it's pretty incredible. I think of Ohio as a purple state, although I don't know right now. But North Carolina is something of a purple state. But we have supermajorities in both the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
And the state of North Carolina funds, invests, and has for years in public transportation, far in excess of what the state of Ohio has done. Not to attack you, Carla, by any, but because I know what you've tried to do. But that is a growing state, okay? Growing very rapidly. The Republicans there recognize the, let's say, in the case of public transit, the value of investing in public transportation and what it means in terms of economic development, attracting jobs, attracting young people, millennials in particular, and they're trying to create the assets that already exist here in Cleveland with the public transportation system and what Columbus is trying to do and what Cincinnati's with their streetcar is trying to do. My hope is that we can get, as has been recommended by Mayor Ruby here, some of our state legislators here in Ohio, to recognize the value of investing in public transportation. So I'll shut up now.
Follow up on that, because I think one of the things that transit needs to do a better job at, and I don't know how better to do it, but the state of Ohio is willing to put all kinds of money into incentives to attract businesses to Ohio. It's number one, job creation, job creation. Yet there is this disconnect that transit makes a very inviting atmosphere for job creation, transit, to attract the millennials, to get the kids who go to college here to stay here after they graduate. And yet for some reason, we can't convince our legislature that there is this connection and that we should be supporting transit if we want to be a growth state.
Okay, oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to make a brief pitch for the Turnpike and for what the state legislature did. We now have the Turnpike Commission Infrastructure Commission. There's a mechanism in place now to use Turnpike funds or to create certain funds. For example, one of the things that was talked about was building a bridge in Kentucky and Ohio, putting a new bridge in and making it a toll bridge and having our infrastructure committee oversee that, create a toll, collect the money, so forth and so on. There are mechanisms in place now for partnerships like that to take place and to help fund them through tolls and other mechanisms. So I just, NOACA should be looking at that. All of the planning agencies should be looking at that as a way to perhaps create some dollars for the future.
So what I hear is take it.
Buy new rail cars.
Well, no, I was going to say, I think what I hear, and this is something we thought about in Illinois when I worked in Illinois, taking a piece of the tollway revenue and diverting it to public transit to pay for that as an alternative method of transportation. Okay. And with that, I think we've got all of our panelists in agreement, and it might be time to bring it to a close, especially when you can get Professor Krumholtz and Ron Tober on the same page. So, thank you very much. So, our next panel consists of leaders who are representing NOACA as current or past board members. All of these individuals have significant accomplishments in their own right, but they can also speak to much of what NOACA has become and how the agency approaches the challenges of transportation planning. These panelists are collectively and individually distinguished and accomplished. I will ask Howard Maier, State Representative Hambley, Chief McCall, and Commissioner Troy to come up to the stage. Howard Maier needs very little introduction. He's the longest-serving NOACA Executive Director at more than 2 decades, and he is my predecessor. Howard has been tireless in his dedication as a public servant and a wise advocate for sound regional planning, and has been a mentor to me. Howard has received a number of professional awards and honors, and I'm sure many of you know Howard's significant past in terms of being a lifelong cartoonist, and I think we have somewhere here the cartoons of the board members that are in the room. So take a look at those as the video's flipping through. Quickly kind of moving on in terms of bio, we have Steve Hambley, who is our current state representative for the 69th House District, which includes most of Medina County. He is in his 2nd term there. He was also commissioner for 18 years in Medina County. During that time, he was a representative on the NOACA board and was president 3 times, 2001, 6, and 11. State Representative Hambley holds a PhD, so we can also call him Dr. Hambley, in history, and has taught at Lorain County Community College as well as other institutions of higher learning. He's written several books about history, and so there are not a whole lot of people that know any more than Steve Hambley does about transportation and history in our region. Going to Valarie McCall. Chief McCall is the Chief of Government and International Affairs for the Office of the Mayor in the City of Cleveland. Her credentials are very deep and impressive, particularly in transportation. She's been on the NOACA board since 2006, becoming president in 2013, the first African-American woman to do so. She was also the chair of the American Public Transit Association in 2016. She has represented the city of Cleveland regionally, nationally, and internationally, and proved herself a champion and protector of the interests of the city and the region. And that's exemplified by many activities, particularly participating in getting the Republican National Convention to be held here successfully in Cleveland. And lastly, we have Commissioner Dan Troy, who is currently serving his 5th term. Now, we say serving as if these are prison sentences, but he is serving his 5th elected term as commissioner. And he is the longest serving member of the NOACA Board of Directors. He has served continuously since 1999, serving twice as board president in 2004 and 2016. He was also a member of the Ohio General Assembly from 1983 to 1996, being known as the expert on budget and taxation issues and having been the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Before his state service, he was a councilman and president in the city of Willowick for 5 terms. He has served as the chair of the Ohio, I'm sorry, you corrected me earlier on this today because it is wrong in the book. The County Commissioners Association of Ohio. Thank you, County Commissioners Association of Ohio. Currently on the board of the regional councils at the national level, is a U.S. Army veteran and a graduate of the prestigious University of Dayton, as am I, go Flyers. And to say that Commissioner Troy's experience in public service is a gross understatement. And I give you my panel with Howard, please giving the introduction.
Well, it's great to be here, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces. A little older than the last time I saw you all, but it's still nice to be here. I had to write my notes out because otherwise I would talk for 2 hours. So I've been retired for almost 6 years now and have been involved with many activities. I teach, I serve on nonprofit boards, I'm involved in community activities, I travel to Washington this weekend, where I had my car towed, by the way. Not happy about that. and have the joys of being with my grandchildren. And my wife and I even take tango lessons. So we're pretty active. We'll give you a demonstration later. But my NOACA experience keeps coming back to me in many expected and unexpected ways. I'm reminded of it often, from reading the newspapers, of course, from talking to friends and colleagues, to meeting with students, and just reminiscing. For me, working at NOACA was more than a job. It brought to bear all of my education, whatever intellect I might have possessed, my personal interest, and frankly, my desire to serve my community. As complicated and as complex as events could be, and I think you got a little notion of how complex they were, I love the work and the knowledge that we could do some good. NOACA put me, personally, at the intersection of public policy, diplomacy, technology, which I never really did get, public finance, and management. It was, as Grace said, a privilege and an honor to be associated with NOACA. At the beginning of my tenure, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, the ICE-T, was enacted, as was the Clean Air Act and its amendments. Those pieces of national legislation changed the nature of metropolitan transportation planning, and I was lucky enough to help implement them. I once determined that there were more local governments in our 5-county area than there were sovereign nations in the world. That fact gave me a little bit of solace, knowing that this complex, complicated area was complex for a reason. I worked hard to try to understand it all and to try to help our planning and decision making. Our work was never done in quiet solitude. It was always in the midst of public scrutiny and had lots of media attention. Never correct, but lots of attention. I don't have the exact figures at hand, but I would estimate that we were involved in the public investment of two-thirds to three-quarters of $1 billion in transportation projects during my time here. Most of that money went to maintaining and improving the existing infrastructure and making the existing system safer and more efficient. A small percentage was used for capacity expansion. Those projects included, among others, basic repaving, safety improvements, traffic signals, public transit improvements, bridge replacements, pedestrian and biking amenities, and planning. We established and updated the region's long-range transportation plan, the short-range transportation improvement programs, and provided services for our local communities. Every investment was based on meeting national, state, local goals, the principles of our long-range transportation plan. Every investment was based on technical analysis, deliberation, and a vote of the board. Sometimes the investments followed very intense debate. I think you get a little flavor of that. Let me talk about the staff and the board for a moment. I always felt good about the NOACA staff. Every now and then they gave me fits, and I probably gave them fits. But basically, everybody on the NOACA staff wanted to help improve the region. I was proud of their work and respected their abilities. The NOACA staff made me look good, and thank you, NOACA staff. Some of you are still here. I enjoyed working with the various boards we had and all of our presidents. I learned a lot about governance from them. I also saw wisdom and political courage. I know some former board presidents are here today, and would you please stand and be recognized? Just former presidents. Everybody here, of course, thanks, Pat. Thank you. I'm often asked what my favorite projects were. We were involved in many significant projects, but I'll cite just 4. The first was the creation of the Transportation for Livable Communities Initiative, the TLCI. The board took money that could have been put into physical projects and were willing to make it available for planning. In some cases, the TLCI funding was the only real money available for local planning purposes. In all cases, it was welcomed by communities. I'm very pleased to know that Grace has kept the program and has expanded it. As a city planner at heart, I'm very pleased to know that NOACA is encouraging good planning. This will help the region's quality of life and improve economic opportunities. The second project was the Bessemer Avenue extension. Not too many people know about that one. It was, I see a few heads nodding. It was a 10-block street off of East 55th in Cleveland's Slavic Village area. NOACA was involved right from the start. We were part of a variety of studies, advocacy with the Transportation Resource Advisory Council, environmental studies, environmental cleanup, funding struggles, and construction. This little street now serves an industrial area and separates industrial truck traffic from a residential area. We worked with the Cleveland planning staff, the council members from the area, the Slavic Village Community Development Corporation, the neighbors. It was local planning and development at its best. And frankly, I was glad NOACA had a role in that project. The third project was the Euclid Avenue Corridor Transportation Project, referred to a number of times. This became known as the Health Line. NOACA had been involved in modeling and planning for years, so we were well familiar with it. The GCRTA, the Federal Transit Administration, ODOT, the City of Cleveland, community institutions, the media, and the public were all involved. One day, Chris Renane, who was then planning director, asked me if NOACA would be willing to use its federal transportation funding to cover the last $10 million needed to complete the project. This was not a casual request because it meant a rearrangement of priorities, and not everyone on the board believed in the project. After much staff analysis, committee process, and public involvement, the proposal came to the board for action. In the end, after much deliberation, the board voted unanimously to make the money available. This meant that elected officials from 5 counties supported a transit project located in Cleveland and East Cleveland. With that vote, it became a truly regional endeavor. The project has been credited for bringing development to an area that was languishing and changing the nature of public transit in Cleveland. The project wasn't just bus rapid transit. It led to a repaving of Euclid Avenue, new utilities, improved lighting, bike lanes, landscaping, new shelters, and other amenities. Fourth one I want to mention is the Senior Transportation Connection. NOACA was involved in this project before there was a Senior Transportation Connection. We did studies with Cuyahoga County, the RTA, the Western Reserve Area Office on Aging, United Way, and others. The idea was that folks who were elderly and disabled needed some kind of transportation. And so we worked on a number of studies. Initially, the Senior Transportation Connection was a public agency. Over a period of time, it was determined that it would be better functioning as a nonprofit, and so it thus became a nonprofit with its main focus as Cuyahoga County. When we started this process so many years ago, I wasn't eligible to ride it. Now I am. So I don't know what that means, but anyway, I could go on and cite many projects, but these 4 are quite unique in their impact and in their scope. And at this point, I'll shut up and turn it over to the other panelists for their comments.
Thank you very much, Howard. Actually, my first question was going to be for you, but I think you've already answered it. And the question was, having been the longest-serving executive director, and I've said this to you a number of times, you made it look really easy. Was it really that easy? But I think based on what you've said and what the others have said, the answer is no.
Absolutely not.
Anything else to add?
Well, I'm still recovering.
Okay, there you have it. Thank you. So then I'll move to Representative Hambley. As a historian, and having served NOACA in various capacity, including as president 3 times, how do you think NOACA's past 50 years will be remembered by the region as a whole and by its member communities, both big and small?
Well, I think you've already heard a number of stories about some of the various projects and we'll just say the initiatives that the organization has taken on. I guess the best analogy as a historian to identify it's like the plumbing in your house. When it's working fine, as it's supposed to, and it's designed, you put the investment in, everybody takes it for granted. But when something wrong goes in the plumbing, guess what? Well, every now and then we would get something wrong in the plumbing, either whether it's for Medina County or for Cleveland or for Geauga, and you can use whatever kind of plumbing you want, whether it's water or the sewer part, as the best analogy. Regardless, you're dealing with a lot of those issues. And what I found, I guess, as a historian, is that when we had those problems, those issues, we end up working together as a board. Trying to find a successful solution to that. One that would still get the plumbing working in order, making sure that everybody's needs were being served as best you could, as the budget or the capacity of that sewer or water would allow. But indeed, when it came down to it, it has a function to it, an important function. That without it, we really wouldn't be civilized as a region. We really wouldn't be able to claim that we could move things forward. So it is the health of that plumbing, if you will, that is the measure, I think, of the testament to NOACA. That when we've had those tough issues, be a widening of I-71, an interchange on I-90, all the various issues involving getting support for the various projects. I remember first when I was as a board president, we had gone through the battle of I-71, the third lane, and some compromises, and didn't quite work out to everybody's liking, but eventually I think anybody going down to Columbus nowadays says, yeah, I can't imagine not having a third lane all the way there. But in the end, when I was first board president, one of the first initiatives that we had as I took on, we're going to get an earmark, federal government, for the Interbelt, for that big project. And we had letters of support from my Board of Commissioners in Medina County as well as other boards of commissioners. Because why? Well, the downtown and access within this region was important to us. So I think that's where the triumph comes, that even after we have these problems in the plumbing, if you will, but we find a way to get around it and realize that we're elected here to represent our districts, but also likewise to be regionalists. None of us get elected to be regionalists, but we have to as a matter of necessity because we're connected. We're connected through that plumbing for various, not only jobs, our culture, our civic events. We all cheer for the Cavaliers. We all cheer for the Browns. We all cheer for the Indians. We all cheer for each other when we have great gains in our region. So we just have to remember that all too often, and occasionally the plumbing is going to dysfunction. And as a historian, we just got to point out, well, we found ways to get over it and in fact make the system even work better.
Thank you. Now I know why you were such a popular professor. You made class very interesting. To Chief McCall, as NOACA board president, you presided over the restructuring of the Code of Regulations, which was one of my first endeavors here. Tell us about it.
Oh, it was easy, piece of cake. Not. I think that, first of all, being an administrator on the board as opposed to being elected, I have a different perspective. And one of the things that as board members we always saw was that if you remember how NOACA used to be structured, the Transportation Committee was the most popular committee, but it wasn't populated by members of the board. So what would happen is we would get projects that would come to the board that we didn't know about or were not that engaged in because it was mostly populated by engineers from the region and professionals and planners. And it would always play out into some very interesting, dynamic, fruitful board meetings at NOACA. And so one of the things that we did was we restructured not just the code of regulations, but we restructured ourselves as a board, and we did that collectively. And so now we have where every committee is chaired by a board member. Board members are on every committee and alternates so that as things move through our process, we're touching it along the way. And I think that was very, very important. And a lot of it was to your leadership and testament, Grace, but also to the direction that the board wanted to go in. As you say, the plumbing and the water, probably sometimes more plumbing than water. But as a board, I mean, we take our job responsibly. I mean, we really are that first step for major planning in this region, and so we have to get along, we have to collaborate, and we have to work together, and I think that restructuring was part of it. It didn't go exactly as I wanted it, just in one or two things, but I don't know if a lot of people know that when we make major changes to particular sections of the code, each region, each governing body, so all 5 counties and the city of Cleveland, have to really support that change, and it has to take a vote of each respective area. And so sometimes that happens, sometimes that don't. But I can tell you, and I think that most of the members that are here today can testify that it works much smoother. We actually get to grow and be a part of projects. We were joking, I think somebody mentioned the buggy. Is Skip here today? Don't tell Skip I mentioned him. So we would argue back and forth sometimes, and he was like, we don't want that in Geauga. We don't care about bike paths. But I said, but you should care about buggy trails because you have a lot of buggies in the area. And now that is something that is important to Geauga. And so what may be different in Cleveland and Cuyahoga and may not be bike trails. But guess what? We don't need the buggy lanes in Ohio, but we care about those bike trails. So as a region, I think we've grown. I think we've fostered development collectively, and I think we are actually in a better position to move forward in the region. We talked about public transportation and how, you know, NOACA is the forefront for us, I would say GCRTA, and Joe knows this, for a lot of things that we're doing on the public transportation side of the world. And so it's not just the roads and the bridges and the highways, it is also public transportation, the moving of people and connecting them to jobs and so forth. So it was not easy. It was a lot of fun, right, Commissioner Kayla? But I think we got far. I think we did a lot, and I think we are putting ourselves on a trajectory for the future moving forward.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Troy, you have been an elected official at the local, the county, and the state level. How does NOACA fit into these various levels of government, knowing that the representatives are those local, state, and county levels of government?
Well, I think NOACA fits well into that because, we're all working for the same customers, whether we're at the local government level or we're at the state government level or at the county government level. And, as I've said when I was president of the governing board a couple times, for all intents and purposes, NOACA is the closest thing that we have to a council of governments in Northeast Ohio. So it's an opportunity for officials from different persuasions. We're not discriminatory. We have county representation. We have municipal representation. We even let townships in. And and we have representatives of the various agencies, whether it's the port authorities, ODOT, water quality agencies, et cetera. And so, it works well because, I think we all have to understand that resources are very finite out there. In a perfect world, and I'm just a big believer in government. I've been doing it most of my life. I was born in Cleveland. I've lived in Western Lake County since I was 8 years old. I was around when NOACA was founded. I think the most important thing that happened that year was the Cleveland Indians finished in third place in 1968, which was their high water mark for a 35-year period of very dismal performances. So, and I remember a pencil box. I used to have that in school too until Sister Mary Ayatollah took it away from me for writing on the desktop. And so, but I think, one of the best definitions I think I hear of politics is, what is politics? Politics is the management of conflict. And what we mean by conflict is that, we might have 14 things we need to get done, but we have the resources to do maybe 5 or 6 of those. So the real tough work, I think, of governing is managing that conflict. And I think through NOACA, working with our partners from the 5 different counties, we're able to say, what is the most sound investment here? And it's tough because people think I should have this or I should have that, but it's trying to collectively decide that, listen, we don't have the resources we'd like to have, as Mayor Ruby has said. People in other levels of government are dropping the ball. Get a little upset when I see a proposed federal infrastructure bill that says we'll give you 20%, you come up with 80% on the local level. I was in the legislature for 14 years, and I voted to raise gasoline taxes 3 times. So if anybody's here wants to put it in the ads against me this fall, go ahead. But we did this. We did this collectively, Democrats, Republicans, Municipal League, County Commissioners Association, townships, the Chambers of Commerce, because every once in a while we said, it's time. We're getting behind on what we have to make investments in. And we would do that. And the partisanship just didn't appear on this. These were collective decisions that were made to advance the services of civilization, which we all preside over as government officials. So, I think NOACA has been very valuable in realizing that we do have these finite resources, and we've got to be smarter, and we've got to do the proper planning, and we've got to give we've got to do the give and take, the compromise, a nasty word these days, compromise, but compromise, reach consensus, reach common ground to get a lot of these things done. So I think NOACA has been very valuable in that. Not only in transportation, though. Again, I've lived here my whole life. I've seen Lake Erie when it was almost dead. I've seen Lake Erie come back from the dead. It's getting a little bit backsliding now, and we've got to do some more work on that. But, water quality planning that NOACA has presided over has been just totally instrumental in restoring the health of that lake. Making sure that what we put into that lake is properly treated before it gets in there. So I think NOACA's work on water quality. I think we remember, maybe we missed the days of all the steel mills down there, but, a considerable amount of air pollution in Cleveland area. NOACA's kind of been riding herd on that with the ozone action days, taking the proper steps, the proper suggestions. So, it's just been very valuable in this region to improve the quality of life and assist us as officials, whether on the state or the local or the county level, in making sure that we generate the best product to ensure that the best level of civilization in our part of the world continues. Thank you.
Thank you. Howard already told us, I think he said originally he was going to tell us about 3 projects, but he told us about 4. What about the rest of you? Do you have any project or projects that you consider the most meaningful that was done while you were on the NOACA board? Or actually 2 of you are still on the NOACA board, but... All the projects?
No, seriously, all jokes. I think all the projects, I think if you start to break them down and what they mean for the respective cities or communities or areas, they're important. So again, we may have our differences of what we feel is that project, but I think they're all important. It was, for me, good to be a part of seeing the Innerbelt Bridge, now the George V. Voinovich Bridge, finally get done. In Cleveland, we plan long-term. Some of these projects you talk about, it's interesting to hear when they started and then to be a part on the back end of finally getting it done. But I will say this, I'd love to see us get to a point where it doesn't have to take that long, truth be told, because that's a long time. But I think a lot of our projects, there's some projects in different communities that now we get out, we get to drive them and see them, I think is important. I do want to put a plug in, though, for one project that NOACA has stepped up and helped us move the needle on, and we're still trying to get Tiger Grant funding for it. Picking up on the BRT and the success of the Health Line is we're looking at doing something we're calling Thrive East 105, East 93rd Street, which for those of us in the room is the number 10 bus that connects from Bracknell through the city all the way to Garfield, pretty much. And if you think about transportation, if this was an old shopping center and that anchor project, the Health Line was a project. This connects across all those main arteries of the city of Cleveland and our business areas. And when coming to fruition, I think it will spur development. Quite honestly, I think it will open up opportunities in the areas we're talking about now. You said Bessemer Extension, I'm thinking about AKA now, part of that is the Opportunity Corridor. The rest of that is part of the Opportunity Corridor. And how do we connect those projects? This is an important project. But I think collectively, I love to hear about some of the other projects that are going on in the other regions. And while we don't always admit, we learn from each other. We share best practices with each other. And I was joking about the buggy trail, but if you really think about that, if that comes to fruition, that'll probably become a national model for how to take care of something that has traffic implications in the Amish community. So I would say all of our projects are important.
I was going to say some of my best recollections actually comes whenever we did collective action together, especially in dealing with issues at the federal or state level. Mayor Ruby had brought up the turnpike. Nothing unified our board is when the governor made his first proposal to sell the turnpike, and we, even as a Republican, we kind of got together and tried to bring in. I think what came about from that made a lot of sense. It went through the legislature. It needed to evolve. So some of our best actions, likewise the track, was probably one of the best inventions, certainly in my lifetime and certainly as a member of the board for 18 years, saw how that implemented, how we embraced it. I remember I volunteered early on. One of the things I learned, Skip Trimble, the other Skip of, there was a NOACA when I was there from Brunswick, it said, volunteer and get involved as much as you can. So there's this little community is going to form with this whole process called the track to bring the projects together. So you're like, okay, I'll jump on it. And we were able to get Route 18 and on part of that list. But the thing is, you learn early on, it's like you get involved, they take it forward, and collectively you come up with your priorities. And you work through that process. And it's not, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but in a couple years, what is important to you is going to see fruition. You just have to be patient, persistent, and care as much about other people's projects as your own. And that was the formula. For me, that's my best recollection, is when we came together with those kind of conclusions that had some real success, either at I'll say dealing with the Columbus or dealing with Washington, D.C.
Well, I think that, to reiterate what Steve had said earlier, I think everyone coming together on the Interbelt project, the Interbelt Bridge project, I think, because everybody said, this is the spoke. The 5 counties, wherever people are going, probably going through this particular, hub of the wheel there. So I think getting together on that, I think, I think some other memories I have is, having been a legislator, which I love that job, because people ask me today, they say, what do you like better, having been a legislator or being a county commissioner? I said, well, being a legislator, just get up every morning and say, there ought to be a law. And, you get on the county level and you have to make all this stuff work. So, But one of the things I know I worked on a legislature was a good experience with, because a lot of times they say in a legislature it's like herding cats. You're trying to count to 50, and I know for 10, 12 years people tried to get a bill taking the phosphorus out of detergents that went into the Lake Erie watershed, and I carried that one term when finally was able to get past it. But it was basically going to member to line up votes. And if Howard remembers, when the NOACA did not recommend the Route 20 project in Paynesville Township to the track. Congressman LaTourette showed up at a NOACA meeting along with Township Trustee Chris Lipp, and we lobbied to get that project. Meanwhile, before that, I had made calls to all of my colleagues on the boards in the 5 counties, and I think was able to line up something like 24 votes, and I think by a 24 to 22 vote, we got that put on the list. And it must have been a good project, because when we went down to the track in Columbus, they rated it number 2 in the state of Ohio. So we were able to do that. So again, just appreciative of all of my colleagues in NOACA for supporting us in Lake County, upgrading State Route 2 in Lake County, which we always consider, I term as Lake County's Main Street. So I think what it is it's kind of like, you learn, and they don't do that much of in Washington, Columbus anymore. It's horse trading, it's compromising, it's working with your colleagues. Maybe you're going to need something done, but make sure that before you need that something done and you need their support, that you're going to get their support, in there. So, I know we always thought earmarks were bad public policy, unless it's something for your district. But on one hand, they don't have them now, but it really contributed to Congress members of both parties working more closely together and reaching compromise and consensus. So. Okay,
great, and that's a terrific end to note on, compromise and consensus. And thank you all to our panelists of the second panel and the first panel. We do have for you a commemorative NOACA pen, so I will give you those before you leave. Please enjoy that gift. And in closing, first I want to tell you that Governor Kasich sent a resolution here to us today commemorating our 50th anniversary. So thank you very much to the governor and the state. We really appreciate the recognition. And in closing, as we've heard, NOACA is a model of a high-performing planning agency. It's helped shape the region in many positive ways. We've also heard that, like any institution, it hasn't been perfect. Certainly there are some valid criticisms in its history, but what makes us stand out, what makes us different, what makes NOACA exceptional as a planning agency is its continual ability to assess itself and its work, ensuring that its impact makes Northeast Ohio an outstanding region maybe the best in the nation and even the best in the world. And to date, it's done a pretty good job. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our sponsors again. And thank you for all of you to come and enjoy the program with us. We look forward to seeing you on September 14th at our annual meeting, where we will continue this discussion. Today we've talked about the past. We're going to talk about the future at the annual meeting. So thank you very much, and the program is adjourned.